Today we got a character creation guide and review for the Jedi Knight specialization from FFG Star Wars RPG, Rise of the Separatists. So the Jedi Knight specialization talent tree is the very first specialization to have a force rating requirement, which is really weird because up until this point, and actually including this point in this book, there's no way to have a force rating of 2, which is the requirement here, at character creation at the time that you would take this as your first specialization. And there's text in here talking about taking it as your first specialization. I thought, is that a mistake? Is there some other way in this book to raise your force rating at creation? Am I just dumb and forgetting one previously? No, apparently, someone commented in one of my videos who have the Collapse of Republic already, apparently there are alternate optional rules for you to basically increase your force rating right out of the gate using the points that you normally would probably want to spend on your characteristics. So you're trading a bit of that for force capability right away. But until you get that book or your GM just decides to house rule it, you can't take this as your first specialization. They might just waive that entirely, which is probably what I would have done. But I won't need to because I will be getting Collapse of the Republic at some point, so, you can look forward to content on that. Anyway, Jedi Knight, is it worth the extra hoops that you go through? That's the big question. They put this barrier in your way, force rating of 2. Is it actually worth it? Well, first of all, there's a pretty good amount of Jedi defense. Parry and reflect, couple ranks of both, as well as the improved version of both. So you got pretty good active defense, also you have a chance of doing some counterattacks, which is nice, and it's important to have a decent amount of both of these because you have other talents in the tree that interact with parry and reflect. This includes a talent where you can use your parry and reflect to help other people, not just yourself, and also another talent that builds on top of that, where when you use parry or reflect to help an ally, it adds an extra layer of survivability onto that character you're protecting. Now, as far as the rest of your personal defenses go, we really don't have much in the way of passive defenses. In fact, we don't even really have a whole lot of grit to help you fuel your active defenses. So, spoilers, when I get to builds, I'm going to talk about how you should probably have a pretty solid will to go with this, because it's a pretty big part of your character. In fact, we have even more talents that help synergize with the strategy of protecting allies. In one, you can actually add a offensive benefit to people that you're near, which encourages you to be near them. And we also have Saber Throw. Having that ranged attack is going to be nice because it makes it easier to keep yourself close to your allies, which is going to be hard to do when you're wielding a melee weapon. But if you can throw it and reliably bring it back, which having that extra force rating requirement means you'll have a higher force rating and more likely to be able to call it back to you, so you're not without your saber in order to parry and reflect the core of your character. Not a bad idea to dual wield lightsabers with this tree, so you can throw one, do some damage, but you still have one to parry and reflect when need be. Now, the rest of the tree is a variety of self-help and utility. We have a little help with some knowledge skills, which kind of makes sense that you only have a little bit. Research and the like. It's part of being a Jedi. They're just as much guardian as they are scholar and diplomat and all that other crap, supposedly. So they have a little bit of academic teaching behind them in their past, so it makes sense we have a little bit of that talent. Also falling in line with that thematically is just a little bit of help with your talking skills. And lastly, we have a pair of talents that deal with a Jedi needing to be strong of mind and spirit, being able to bounce back in different ways. One way basically just helps them use the Force in order to better deal with strain loss. Another way is actually very similar to the last tree we talked about from this book, Jedi Padawan, where they had some help with failed checks and recovering from that. They got one of these too, but it's in a different way. So if you go from Padawan to Jedi Knight, you'll have 3 talents that all help you bounce back from failure or cope with failure of checks in general, but just in a wide variety of ways, which is kind of nice. And then finally, dedication and force rating, of course. So, how to build your Jedi Knight? Well, as I said before, will is going to be important. You want that strain threshold high. You want to fuel that reflect and parry to help protect your teammates and yourself, of course. You want a nice high strain threshold. You have a little bit of grit to help you, but I would definitely prefer a 3 in will. And if you do that and you want a 4 as well, I would suggest a 4 in brawn. That will keep you really resilient and tough from a damage perspective. Also, doing damage, because lightsaber by default is tied to your brawn characteristic. Another build, however, that I would like to do is pair this with Neimon Disciple from the Force and Destiny core book. You know, Neimon Disciple, it's a lightsaber form that's fairly balanced. There's a decent amount of defense, there's some good utility with like using the Force to disarm people. There's also a decent amount of talking in there, I think. It just, to me, feels like a pretty good general Jedi tree when paired with this, which also feels like a pretty good general Jedi tree, but in a different way, an emphasis on protecting people. Those two things combined, I think, would make for a really interesting tree. If you're in it for the long haul, start with one of these and move on over to the other. Probably start off with Neimon Disciple and move on to this, because they would get the Neimon technique, which means you could use your will for lightsaber checks instead of brawn, keep your strain threshold nice and high to fuel your parry and reflect, and probably other abilities. I don't remember exactly what this has. Disarming, using the Force and telekinesis. Disarming, I think moving people around the battlefield. There's a lot of fun things you can do. Be a good all-around Jedi, and also, some who study Neimon also learn to fight with two lightsabers, enabling them to be even more effective against multiple opponents. So it works from a lore standpoint, and also mechanically, as I said before. Other trees you might find that are good pairings if you want to pair this with something else would be some of the Guardian trees, either from the core book or the source book. Not only were many of them defensive, tankish, protecting of other people, but also there was a common emphasis on leadership, you know, presence-based stuff in addition to protecting. Not only does that fit thematically with a Jedi Knight during the time of the Clone Wars, but also we got a couple career skills from the specialization that are presence-based. And probably from the core career as well. Though it should be noted, the only help with presence-based stuff in the talent tree itself is just that little bit of help with your talking checks, and that's not just presence-based stuff. Although most of the talking skills are presence-based, so take that into account. But putting supplemental trees aside, the two main characteristics you should be focusing on are brawn and will, so you can be protecting and attacking as often as possible. By all means, go for a 4-4 build. You'll be pretty tanky and tough to take down. And because you have a couple different ways to help protect your teammate, odds are good the GM or droids are going to make you a pretty high priority target, so you're going to want to be nice and beefy. A 4-4 Brawn and Will build is probably best for this, is what I would go with personally, but also a 4-3 and whatever else build will also work just fine with this. So, is it worth the Force Rating 2 requirement? I don't know, it's a good tree, that's for sure, but is it a great tree? Is it mind-blowing? Does it need to be mind-blowing to have a Force Rating requirement? Should there be mind-blowing trees behind a higher paywall, for lack of a better phrase? I don't know. It is a good tree. It's above average, I would say, and it's a really solid protector, and along the way, you'll be a pretty decent damage dealer. You are going to want to make sure that you have a 4 in your combat stat early on, though, because like most protector trees I've come across, it takes a bit of time before you work your way through the tree to where you get to protector stuff. For the most part, you're going to be protecting yourself. Eventually, you can extend that on to other people, so that's one thing to keep in mind. And especially if you take the other route of self-improvement, self-empowerment, general Jedi stuff, the talking, the knowledge, the strain management, to help you with failure and other stuff. If you take that route, well, it's a separate route. There's no going back and branching out from that one, structurally speaking. So if that's your focus, general Jedi stuff, you're not really sure what you want to do, it's going to be even longer before you do the Guardian stuff. To be honest, it's hard to imagine it being worth it to start in that section. I recommend starting with the parry, reflect, defensive, protection stuff. Just go down that area, fulfill that role as good as you can, as quickly as you can, and if that's not a role you want to do, get another tree. Oh, you can also jump up really easily from prone. That's some other nice utility stuff. Anyway, that is it for today. If you like this video and want to see more, keep watching. Probably should work on my endings, huh?